The storm that night was unlike anything I'd seen in years. The rain came down in relentless sheets, hammering against the office windows like 1,000 tiny fists. The wind howled through the empty streets, bending trees and sending trash, cans tumbling like toys. Every so often, lightning illuminated the room, casting sharp, fleeting shadows across the walls. The low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead was the only constant sound inside, a faint companion to the chaos outside. The office was eerily quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that makes every creak of a chair or distant thud seem amplified, almost alive. I tried to focus on the paperwork in front of me, but my eyes kept darting to the clock on the wall, counting down the hours until my shift ended. The idea of stepping outside into that storm was daunting, but at least it meant I'd be free of this building and its oppressive stillness. At around 2 a.m., just as I'd begun to settle into the monotony, I heard it, a knock at the front door. It was faint at first, almost drowned out by the pounding rain, but it came again, louder, more insistent. I froze, my pen hovering above the paper. No one ever came here this late, not unless it was an emergency. My stomach tightened as I stood and walked toward the door. The glass was fogged from the temperature difference, and streaks of rain distorted the figure standing outside. I could just make out the outline of a man, his shoulders hunched against the storm. He stood unnaturally still, not shifting or fidgeting like you'd expect from someone braving that kind of weather. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, I saw him clearly. A pale, soaked man in tattered clothes, his hair plastered to his skull, and his eyes dark and hollow. Something about him felt wrong. The knock came again, sharp and deliberate, and I jumped despite myself. Swallowing my unease, I opened the door a crack. The wind immediately forced its way in, carrying a spray of cold rain that sent a shiver down my spine. "Please," he said, his voice low and hoarse, almost drowned out by the storm. "My car broke down. I just need to wait inside until the rain lets up." His words were simple enough, but something about the way he said them felt off. There was no urgency, no real desperation in his tone, just a flat, emotionless delivery that set my nerves on edge. I hesitated, my hand tightening on the doorframe. The rational part of me screamed to turn him away, to lock the door and call someone, anyone, but the sight of him, so drenched and pitiful, triggered a pang of guilt. "All right," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." The air seemed to shift the moment he crossed the threshold. It grew colder, despite the heater humming in the corner and the faint scent of mildew wafted in with him. He left a trail of water as he walked, each step marked by a wet, sloshing sound that made my skin crawl. He sat down in the lobby without a word, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a puppet on strings. "Can I get you anything?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Coffee? A towel?" He shook his head, the motion almost imperceptible. "No, I'll be fine." The minutes dragged on. The only sounds were the relentless tapping of rain against the windows and the steady drip of water from his clothes. I tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. He sat unnervingly still, staring at the floor with an intensity that made me uneasy. The puddle around his feet grew larger, darker, and I realized with a start that it wasn't just water anymore. It was thick and murky, with a faint, sour odor that reminded me of stagnant pond water. Are you sure you're all right? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. This time, he turned to look at me. His face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes, there was something wrong with them. They weren't just hollow, they were empty, like twin voids that threatened to swallow the light around them. My breath caught in my throat. The dripping sound grew louder, more insistent, as if the water was coming from somewhere deeper than his soaked clothes. His hands, resting on his knees, began to glisten unnaturally, droplets forming and sliding off his skin. It was as though he was leaking, his very body dissolving into the growing puddle beneath him. Hey, I said, my voice shaking now. You're not, you're not okay. I think you need. He stood abruptly, cutting me off. His movements were wrong, jerky, and unnatural, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. Water poured from him in streams now, pooling at his feet and spreading across the floor in dark, undulating waves. What the hell is happening to you? I stammered, backing away. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst from my chest. He took a step toward me, the puddle around him moving with him, almost alive, his face twisted into a grotesque grin, the skin pulling taut over his skull. Water dripped from his mouth as he spoke, his voice a wet, guttural rasp that sent chills down my spine. I'll be back. And then he collapsed. His body disintegrated into the puddle, which writhed and bubbled as though it had a mind of its own. The air grew colder still, and the lights flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows that danced across the walls. The puddle hissed and gurgled, and from its depths came whispers, not words I could understand, but a cacophony of voices that seemed to reach into my very soul. I stood frozen, unable to move or even breathe, as the puddle slowly seeped into the floor, leaving nothing behind. The storm outside began to calm, the wind and rain fading into an eerie stillness that felt more oppressive than the noise. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every creak of the building, every distant rumble of thunder sent my heart racing. And now, whenever it rains, I hear that faint knock at the door and feel his presence lurking just beyond the glass. One day, I know he'll return, and next time, I don't think I'll be able to stop him.